Thank you, everyone. All right, everyone ready to learn? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the influence of gender and sex on disease. Now, you're all going to get a book tonight, but I also am going to mention this one that is it's very new. It's hot off the press, not available quite yet, but it is the newest book by Dr. Karen Jensen, who was here a little while ago as well. I was lucky enough to take over her practice in Victoria quite a few years ago, so she is a good friend of mine. She actually mentions me in the book. Well, I was so flattered that I actually saw it on the airplane this morning. I was so happy. But she talks a lot about this and how gender matters and sex matters, because it's very interesting. If we look at the history of research and the history of medicine, most of it has been actually done on men or male subjects or male animals or even male cell lines. And of course, we have very different functions, right? Everything from our brain to our hearts to our reproductive organs, we're very, very different from men. I don't know if you guys can read all this. We are going to share this with you after as well. But it's important, a lot of those typical illnesses that we can suffer from, so for example, heart disease and heart attacks, the presentation of that in women is much, much different than it is in men. The symptoms are different, and the outcome is also different. However, we are given the same treatments and the same medications that men would be given. We also fare much worse than men after a heart attack. Women suffer 3 times as much more than men from autoimmune disease, right? So autoimmune disease is where your immune system is hypervigilant, attacking your body, and you have different symptoms. Rheumatoid arthritis, MS, things like that. We're also more susceptible to Alzheimer's, chronic fatigue syndrome, osteoporosis, diabetes, anxiety, depression, urinary tract disorders, IBS, and eating disorders. So we look at all this and we're thinking, well, why are we being treated the same way when we present differently and we are more susceptible to these things? And really interesting and unfortunate here that in research, there was a ban on women in research that lasted all the way up to 1993. Now, we were being used in research for a short period of time until the thalidomide experience happens. If you're familiar with thalidomide, that medication that was actually given to pregnant women to help with morning sickness, and their babies were actually being born without limbs, fingers, toes, and full arms and legs and things like that. And after that, so that was in the 70s, after that period, women banned from research because we have the potential to get pregnant. We have a menstrual cycle that can interrupt the research, and so therefore this ban was created. So all that research that happened basically between that time and 1993 was all done specifically with men. When we look at medications, again, we're looking at the sort of traditional medical model here with medications. 80% of all drugs that were pulled from the US market between 1997 and 2001 caused more side effects in women than men. We are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to experience a reaction, yet we're given the same dosing and strength of medications that men will be. And I like this. Women are not just men with boobs and tubes, right? We actually have differences in our physiology. We're smaller, we have a smaller surface area inside of us, and we're also able to metabolize things differently. In other words, we can break down medications much more differently than men, which can cause spikes or dips in that medication. It takes us 2 times longer than men to absorb or digest our food and our minerals and nutrients and vitamins, including medications. So I just wanted to throw out some statistics because, well, it's an overwhelmingly women crowd here. But basically, we have to remember that when we look at the science, not all of it's going to apply to you. So we have to be aware, and we have to be vested, and we have to have the education to also ask our general practitioners or our family doctors, naturopaths as well, to consider those differences, right, before you go on, say, a medication or even a supplement. So taking charge of your health is going to involve 3 major things, which we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to talk about how to balance your sex hormones. That's your estrogen, your progesterone, testosterone, DHEA. We're also going to talk about how to improve sleep, because without proper sleep, that can throw off your hormones. And then, of course, our adrenal glands, so supporting our adrenal glands. Does everyone know what the adrenal glands are? Stress response, right? Did everyone get a chance to look at this and potentially fill that out? You don't have to fill it out if you don't want to, if you don't have a pen, but if you can score yourself, this will help understand what might help you as we go through this presentation. So we're going to talk about those three things, and then obviously on top of that, we can't forget about the thyroid, because that has a very intricate role in our hormone health and mood and memory support, which a lot of us, have issues with, and that's, again, that connection with hormones. Okay, so step one is balancing your hormones. Now this may apply a little bit more to those who are menstruating still, or those who are having the hot flashes and night sweats, or some of those perimenopausal symptoms. So balancing our hormones, one of the most important hormone to balance is estrogen. And the reason why is because estrogen dominance is very, very common in our lifestyle and in our surroundings. Does anyone know what estrogen dominance is or has heard of that? Nods, yes, okay. So estrogen dominance, now I'm going to pull up some of the symptoms and you might think, oh, that's normal, that's what I experience every month. But it's truly not something that you should be experiencing every month. So estrogen dominance simply is having too much estrogen or not enough opposed estrogen, in other words, low progesterone. So that's the typical scenario that we see in women today. And that can happen from three things. One, xenoestrogens. Xenoestrogens are foreign estrogens. They're not the estrogens that we make, but they're the estrogens that we have in our environment, in our water, in our food, in our medications, that actually throw off our own estrogen levels. Unhealthy estrogen metabolism is the second cause, and that's when your liver is not functioning well enough to actually break down those xenoestrogens, as well as the estrogen that you're making. And then the third cause is having that unopposed estrogen, which typically is due to having low progesterone. You really want to look at that balance. That balance is much more important than the actual numbers of each of those two hormones. So these are the symptoms of estrogen dominance. And like I said, these are not healthy symptoms, but to some they may seem normal. One that I talk about a lot is breast tenderness, right? Breast tenderness, very common that women will have, whether it's throughout their cycle, if it's through perimenopause or right before their period, which is the most common, but that is not healthy, right? We shouldn't have these large fluctuations that actually create that breast size change that dramatically. We should be able to actually break down our estrogens to accommodate that surge so that it doesn't actually affect our breast tissue. PMS, headaches, migraines specifically that are related to our cycle, outside of some of the other causes of migraines, are symptoms of estrogen dominance. Of course, PMS could be mood changes, irritability, food cravings. Weight gain and belly fat, where we talk about the sort of spare tire effect, which can happen more so in middle age, sort of right before perimenopause happens. And that's again because you've accumulated all of these estrogens throughout your life, and now you're having these symptoms that you're actually being able to see and measure. Acne around your period, or again when you're going through perimenopause, is not a normal healthy thing, but again it's very, very common. Hot flashes is also common in menopause when you have low estrogen, but it can be a source or cause of high estrogen levels or spikes while you are still cycling. Low thyroid, now again, we have to be aware of this because hypothyroidism is actually very, very common in our society today, and the estrogen has a direct impact on our thyroid gland. Slow metabolism. So you're young, you can eat whatever you want, and then you hit a certain age and you no longer can do that. You have to start exercising more and eating more specifically. And again, that's because that estrogen is being stored in our fatty tissue, and our body doesn't necessarily want it to go and affect the rest of our body organs. Brain fog, it was another common one that I see. Decreased libido and depression. So is everyone familiar with one or more of those symptoms, either now or in your past? Right, it's very, very common. So we have to understand estrogen. I'm not going to get too into the biochemistry, although that's sort of my nature, but I want it to be understandable for you because it does make sense as to why you're not necessarily treating the estrogen, but you want to support the liver when we're dealing with estrogen. So we have three types of estrogen in our bodies. We have E1, E2, and E3. E1 is the one that circulates most when we are postmenopausal. E2 is what we have more in our bodies when we are in our reproductive years. And then E3 is actually a byproduct, or basically a breakdown product of those two other estrogens. So you want to have a healthy ratio of these three, which a lot of us do. We also want to break down these three estrogens properly. So I put an example of alcohol, not related to estrogen at all, but I wanted to make an example of something that is not as unhealthy as its breakdown product. So alcohol, right, you ingest alcohol, it's toxic, it creates symptoms in you, can affect your brain, your heart, all parts of your body. But it's actually when ethanol or alcohol gets broken down into acetaldehyde that it becomes toxic. Acetaldehyde is extremely toxic, it's carcinogenic, and our body breaks down alcohol into that. So that's the toxic component of alcohol. That's also the component that crosses into our brain and gives us the feeling of being intoxicated or hungover. Our body, though, if your liver is healthy, will break down that acetaldehyde further into acetate, which is water-soluble, easy to get rid of, and non-toxic. So I put this example in there so that you understand that just like estrogens, which are healthy and necessary, it's when they break down into their metabolites that we have an issue. And we want to encourage the proper breakdown and excretion of these estrogens so that we don't have the symptoms of estrogen dominance and we don't raise our risk of things that are more serious, such as breast cancer, uterine cancer, and heart disease. So again, as I said, I won't get too biochemical, but basically what we're trying to do when we encourage proper liver health is to convert our estrogens here into a very nice protective breakdown product, the 2-estradiol and the 2-estrone, and not convert it into these two breakdown products, which actually can cause cancer and heart disease. You can actually get your levels tested. Now they have a urine test that you can do through your naturopathic doctor or a complementary medical doctor that will look at the ratios of all of your estrogens as well as the breakdown products, just to kind of see where things are at. And again, this is not an estrogen issue, it's really more a liver issue. But before we do any liver support, we also want to make sure we're preventing extra estrogens from coming into our system. So these are the top 10 sources of xenoestrogens. You can see that basically it's hard to avoid, right? We can't always control what is going into our water. If you're consuming dairy, which is pretty common, right? These cows are made to think or made to physiologically be pregnant or breastfeeding when they have not had a calf, right? And how do you do that? Of course, you have to use hormones. Otherwise, that cow will only provide milk for a short period of time. But in the dairy industry, you need that milk for years. So, of course, those estrogens are going into your dairy products. We're seeing it in canned food. It has that bisphenol A ring, right? The plastic on the inside of your canned foods. Those are endocrine disruptors, and those increase your exogenous or your xenoestrogens. Farmed fish, tap water, plastics. So BPA was removed from baby bottles quite a few years ago now. However, they've still identified at least probably 50 other toxic components of baby bottles that just haven't reached the period of being studied enough to actually pull those sorts of things out of them. I will mention a couple in a few slides to watch for. Pollution, perfumes and colognes, anything with phthalates in it, right? Those are endocrine disruptors. Pesticides, of course, which is why the importance of getting organic for the foods that are sprayed more commonly. Avoiding GMOs, because usually those foods, specifically soy and corn in Canada, are much more sprayed than the non-GMO ones. And medications. So medications that typically cause this as well are going to be your birth control, right? Birth control pills. And what's the issue with birth control? Birth control also comes out in the urine. The urine goes into the toilet, into the sewage system, into waterways, into our oceans, right? That is going into our fish and into whale populations, and that's why we're seeing a lot of, potentially we're seeing those reproductive issues with whale populations because they're accumulating these estrogens and potentially affecting their fertility. One example was with Lake Apopka. I don't know, did anyone ever hear about this in the 80s? No, this is pretty interesting. So Lake Apopka is in Florida, I believe. They have it has a very high alligator population. And they would actually, researchers would go out, because it's quite a thing, it's a fairly large lake. They would go out at night and they would count up to 2,000 alligators that they could actually see swimming in this lake. Unfortunately, in the late 80s, so about 10 years later, unbeknownst to the researchers, DDT was being leached into this lake. And they started to see the numbers going down to as low as 150 from 2,000 that they could tag or look and identify at night. And what they actually did is they looked further into what was going on, and they noticed that because of the DDT, which is carcinogenic and also an endocrine disruptor, all of the male alligators were growing. They all had penises that were 1/4 the size that they should have been, and they had estrogen levels that were extremely high, and their testosterone was bottomed out. So those alligators, the males, were turning female very slowly, but they were, and therefore unable to reproduce to create new ones. So that was pretty scary. They then saw it also affecting the panther population down there. The male panthers, when tested, had much higher estrogen levels than the females. And of course, that was also affecting their populations. And this is from DDT, which we do know is very toxic and carcinogenic. We don't have it in our systems as much as we used to. However, it does exemplify how much these chemicals can actually affect our hormones, right? So we have to be very aware to keep these out of our home as much as possible. So I wanted to show you this just quickly here. Those recycling codes. So of course you want to avoid the BPA, which again, most things are these days advertised as BPA free. But when you flip something over, on the bottom, you also want to avoid recycling codes 3 and 7. Just remember that, jot that one down. Or the letters PC, basically because they will still contain the phthalates and the plastics, the PVC, basically, that are still going to disrupt your hormone system. So there's lots of different things out there on the market. I wanted to show this one, and it works out great because it's what you guys got today. I think you all got a lotion. Is that correct? Yeah. So these, of course, are going to be free of phthalates, BPA free. Basically, are going to be very, very clean products that you don't have to worry about putting on your head or on your body, because our skin is our largest organ, and it does absorb much more than any other part of our body. So it is important whenever you're choosing something that you're going to put on yourself to make sure it's not going to disrupt your hormone system. Another good thing to do is to avoid the Dirty 12, the Dirty Dozen, right? This is the new one for 2017. The Dirty Dozen indicates the foods in North America that are most sprayed by pesticides and herbicides. Environmental Working Group is a great resource. I will show a slide at the very end with their website. It's just ewg.org. But they post this every year to illustrate the top 12 foods that are being sprayed. And then the Clean 15 is great if you don't want to spend all your money on organic produce all the time. Then you can opt to find the Clean 15. You don't have to do that organic. It's not as critical or crucial because these 15 foods are not sprayed to any extent as some of the others. And things do change every year. Usually about 3 or 4 will either swap places with the Clean 15 or they will be introduced. Okay, so once you've got your xenoestrogens out of your house, you're eating a little bit healthier, trying to eat more, incorporate more organic foods, and fewer pesticides. We want to make sure we are supporting our liver because that is what essentially will break down our estrogens and keep us healthy. So a few things to do for your liver every day, if you can, if you're okay with this, is eating cruciferous vegetables. Right, cruciferous vegetables, very, very important for many reasons. They have enzymes, glucosinolates and myrosinase enzymes, which help to break down estrogens in your body and support your liver and increase your antioxidant status. So broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, etc. I always incorporate at least one of these in a smoothie if I can, and then maybe one later on in the day. Now, for anyone who may have thyroid issues or concerned about low thyroid, remember, these foods, although very healthy, can be goitrogenic if you already have some sort of hypothyroidism or subclinical hypothyroidism. So just be sure to cook these vegetables if you are concerned about that. Cooking them will eliminate those goitrogens, basically removes it out of that material, and you're safe to consume that. It's not going to tax the thyroid if you do so. Other superfoods, turmeric. Turmeric is excellent. It supports the liver cells. It helps make more glutathione as well, either putting it in as a spice, or in some cases, if you've got a lot of inflammation in your body, choosing a supplement which is high in curcumin. Apples and beets are also great for supporting the liver, and they have good source of fiber to help bind up toxins that you will eventually excrete. And an artichoke, really good for your gallbladder. Seaweed and garlic, again, for those minerals which we need for your detoxification of the liver. Starting your day with a cup of warm water with lemon is also a great idea. Does anyone do this already? Yeah, it's pretty common. Just don't do it too much, right? Your dentist will get angry, because if you do drink lemon water throughout the day, it can affect your tooth enamel. So I suggest this quick tip, right? At home, get a big pitcher, glass if you have one, fill it with warm or hot water. Cut at least 1 to 2 organic lemons, cut it up, squeeze, and drop them into that pitcher, right? The lemon juice is very good because it is a little bit acidic and helps with your digestion, but it's the actual peel and pith that has the bitter components that stimulate your liver function. So it's actually not the juice that's as important as the rest of the lemon. So I leave my lemons in there probably for a good 1 to 2 weeks until they look really terrible. So every day I just continue to fill my pitcher up, reusing that lemon. And then I eventually, once they look really gross, I will take them out and replace with new ones. I always pour myself a glass of water before bed from that, so that that water can reach room temperature, so that when you wake up, you're not drinking a glass of very cold water. Of course, room temperature is better than that. If you can warm it, great. But I will forget, so I just leave it there, and that's the first thing I do, and I just down it. And I might even add a little bit of extra water to that glass just to rinse my mouth so that I don't leave too much acidic residue in there from the lemon. And your dentist will be happy. Moving your body is also important because that moves our lymphatic system, right? Dry brushing is another way you can do that. Has anyone heard of dry brushing or does that? So it's dry brushing. I don't know, do you have any dry brushes here? Possibly over here. Oh, here. I could do a demo. So you can get a dry brush. So basically it's brushing your skin, which helps move your lymphatic system underneath your skin, and it encourages excretion of toxins, because toxins also sit in our lymphatics until it actually gets into our circulation. So you actually always brush up to your heart, remember? This feels kind of nice. I have one that's quite rough. So it almost feels like it's scratching your skin, but honestly it won't. And you, again, always towards the heart, so even arms to the heart, right? Your lymph nodes are going to be in your armpits and the groin, in the neck. So again, encouraging that lymphatic flow from those always to the heart. That's going to, again, encourage proper elimination of toxins. And then once you've got all that covered, then we can look at supplementation. And so one of the most important ones to do that is going to be EstroSense, which does detoxify those healthy hormones. So this is what it will look like here, in case you can't see it. So EstroSense, again, what we're talking about for this product is encouraging liver detoxification, phase 1 and phase 2, to specifically help bind up xenoestrogens and the estrogen metabolites. Unfortunately, I'm practicing in BC. I'm actually involved in a clinical trial with this product. And so I have patients that are consuming 3 of these capsules per day, and we're testing their estrogen levels and their breakdown products to prove exactly how it's working. Because this product has been on the market for, I think, at least a decade, right? We've known that it improves PMS symptoms, breast tenderness, it helps with liver detoxification, but it wasn't until those tests were available, which is only about a year, about a year ago, that we're able to prove and see exactly why it's doing what it's doing. So again, it's helping with that balance. It's also going to be great for any PMS and hormonal acne, and anyone who is on oral birth control, right? Or even, I don't think Depo-Provera shots used too much anymore, and not necessarily the Mirena IUD, but definitely any oral contraception. This is something that is recommended to be taken with that. It doesn't affect the ability for that medication to work, so it's not going to affect the contraception aspect of it, but it will help balance and prevent those xenoestrogens, those drug estrogens, from accumulating in your body and creating side effects. So again, the dosage is 3 per day, all at once, in the morning, whenever you get a chance. Okay. So take-home message for tonight, really. Yes. Bottled water is bad, chocolate is good, right? Chocolate's good, has lots of antioxidants, really good for the liver. The ever-changing rules of health, right? Every day there's something new. Okay, step 2. So that's your first step, was how to manage your hormones. Again, estrogen is going to be the most important one that we want to look at. Again, very specific for reproductive menstruating women, but also for those in perimenopause and menopause. And we will talk a little bit later again about specific help for menopausal symptoms. But before that, we'll talk about sleep. So 3 common sleep problems: sleep onset insomnia, or having a difficult time falling asleep; sleep maintenance insomnia, which is unable to stay sleeping; and then we have sleep interrupted sleep, which is we're going to talk about interruption by hot flashes or night sweats. So just, if anyone wants to share, just raise your hand. Anyone have sleep issues here? Okay, yeah, so looks like 30% or more. It's very common, again, but it's, of course, not healthy. And treating the adrenals, I starred that because that's also something, if you have any kind of sleep issue, that you want to make sure you're also targeting, because unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle, and the more sleep you deprive yourself of, the more stress your body and your adrenals will actually be under. So again, let's start with the quick habits that you can do. Bedtime routines are really important. Giving yourself enough time to come down from the day. If you've got family and kids and job and all this sorts of stuff that creates stress in your life, it is really important to provide yourself that time, if you can, on your own, to get yourself into a more relaxed state. When you're active and busy and planning and thinking, our brains are in what we call beta state. Beta brainwave activity happens. Very important, because we have to plan, we have to, look into our past and our future to make decisions and goals and all that sort of stuff. But we are unable to jump from a beta state in our brain to a sleep state. What we have to do is we have to get into an alpha brainwave state before we can fall asleep. And so all of these sleep habits do encourage healthy alpha brainwave activity. Alpha brainwave activity is not a sleep state, but it is a state that you feel, or that you're in, when you're very grounded, you're thinking clearly, you're present, you're in the now, you're not thinking about anything, the monkey mind is not happening, the hamster is off the wheel, right? That's when you're in alpha brainwave activity. So taking a bath, meditating, listening to music, journaling, all these sorts of things have been proven to increase alpha brainwave activity in your brain. Once you're in alpha, much easier way of getting into your theta and delta waves of sleep. So creating a relaxed sleep environment. I'm guilty of this because I have a dog and he sleeps in my bed, and I always said I would never let him sleep in my bed, and then, of course, I do. Animals in the bed, children in the bed, of course, that's not going to help you have a restful sleep in some circumstances. And light, right? The light of the streets, or going to bed, or having, nowadays it's getting darker, but, in the dead of summer, right? It's very bright early in the morning and it stays light out quite late. So making sure you do have that darkness in your room. And why? Because darkness stimulates the production of melatonin from the pineal gland in your brain. That is the trigger for melatonin, is outer darkness, right? And it isn't just, again, sunlight that interacts with that. It's any type of light. So even a night light, anything like that will affect your ability to make and secrete melatonin. And finally, some other things that some people will do. If you want to have a snack before bed, I generally recommend at least 30 to 45 minutes before, but always choose something that's high in protein with a little bit of fat and a little bit of fiber. Those three components are the most important. Reason why those three things, fiber, protein, and fat, help balance blood sugar. And blood sugar spikes and drops will happen in your sleep if you're having too many carbohydrates before bed. And that spike or that drop will actually create a wake cycle when you're trying to stay sleeping. The typical time that you'll wake up from having too much carbs or even alcohol is going to be between 1 and 3 a.m. So if you're the type of person that wakes between 1 and 3, so from a Chinese medical perspective, as well as when we've looked at it physiologically, that is when your liver is most active. So if your liver is most active and you're detoxifying from drinking wine with dinner, or if it is your liver is active to pump sugar into your bloodstream because your liver controls your blood sugar to a certain extent, you're looking at a liver issue between 1 and 3 a.m. So always, always have a snack that has protein or a little bit of fat or a little bit of fiber. Oh, husband that snores. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I work very closely with a sleep apnea clinic. Snoring is not always from sleep apnea, but yes, I definitely would have that diagnosed and hopefully looked at. And in some cases, of course, separate. We won't even get into that, but separate beds and blah, blah, blah. But something to think about. It's tricky. Or snoring wives, I've heard that. My parents, I think, snore equally as loud when I stay with them. All right, so now if you don't, if you're employing all those important things for a proper sleep, restful sleep, getting yourself into alpha brainwave activity, but you're still struggling, Tranquil Sleep will do it for you in most cases. It's very effective, and it contains 3 things that will help you fall asleep but also stay asleep. So I do recommend this for patients or customers that have either one of those sleep types of insomnia. So the combination, it's got your L-theanine. L-theanine, if anyone hasn't heard of this, L-theanine actually helps put your brain into alpha. Okay, it increases GABA in your brain, and GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. L-theanine, essentially taking L-theanine is like doing a 20-minute meditation in pill form, for me at least. So it keeps you grounded, allows you to think clearly, but it also gets you out of beta brainwave activity so you can get into your sleep cycles. I love L-theanine for that. Melatonin is also in this product at a dose of 3 milligrams if you take 2. So 1.5 in 1 tablet. Melatonin, again, is the hormone that you normally will secrete from the pineal gland in your brain, and that's sedating. So that will help you fall asleep fairly quickly. And then finally, the 5-HTP is rounded off here because 5-HTP crosses the blood-brain barrier, gets into your brain, and makes serotonin. Serotonin on its own cannot get into your brain. It has to be made in your brain. So when you take the precursor, you get more serotonin, and serotonin allows you to sleep longer. So this is what helps you to stay sleeping at night, and helps for people that wake up. If they have to wake up to go pee, at least they can fall back asleep fairly quickly. Now for those who have hot flashes, night sweats that is irritating their sleep cycle, that's when I'm recommending something to help balance those hormones, and that's with Menosense. So this is for women that do have or have gone through or are going through menopause, right? Typically not for women that are younger, because we're not looking at a low estrogen situation. Menosense will help to balance those hot flashes. and night sweats. It will also help to naturally raise estrogen levels to a healthy estrogen level to a certain extent by supporting the adrenal glands. So it has been used for other things besides the hot flashes and night sweats. So brain and memory fog, vaginal dryness, irritability, nervousness, and mood swings. The ingredients there, black cohosh has been one of the most researched herbs out there, very effective at helping with those symptoms. Dong Quai is very good at energizing you, providing more vitality. It's like the female ginseng, so although it gives you vitality, it doesn't interrupt your sleep, so this is still safe to take before bed. Vitex is a balancer, again, one of my favorites. It will help balance also your estrogen and progesterone. And then hesperidin and gamma-rhizinol, both, again, extensive research to help with those night sweats and hot flashes. So the dosing for Menosense is 2 twice a day. A lot of women don't need to take that much. 2, I say, in the morning for any daytime symptoms, and then 2 before bed for nighttime symptoms. If you don't get hot flashes at night, or you find that tranquil sleep, or even some of those healthy sleep habits is working, then you don't necessarily need to be taking this at night. Now, we mentioned this right at the beginning, where stress and sleep are very closely connected. It's a vicious cycle, right? If you're not sleeping, you're the type to look at the clock and realize it's been another hour since you looked at the clock and you're still awake. That creates a stress response in your body. Stress creates an increase in cortisol, which interacts with melatonin and actually counters the production of melatonin, which then causes you to stay awake further. And again, the cycle continues. So with this, if you have stress in your life, which most of us do, and if you have any sort of hot flashes or menopausal symptoms, we still want to include adrenal support in that regimen. So the adrenal glands, you all know what those are, right? They sit on top of the kidneys. They are glands that make a lot of different things for us. They make hormones. They pick up the slack when your ovaries shut down when you go through menopause. So when you go through menopause, your ovaries shrink. They stop producing estrogen and progesterone, and your adrenals have to do that job. They pick up the slack to help you maintain and sustain smaller amounts of those hormones. So the women that get the worst menopausal symptoms, I will say, have the most adrenal fatigue, because it means their adrenals were not strong enough to counter that drop, that change that's happening. And so you always want to encourage adrenal support if you're going through menopause and having symptoms, or you're living a stressful lifestyle. So when you have a stress, which, there's lots of different stressors out there, the first thing that goes up in your bloodstream, which also comes from the adrenal glands, is adrenaline, right? So you guys all know what an adrenaline rush is like. Heart rate goes up, you clammy hands, your pupils will dilate, all those sorts of things, right? You know what an adrenaline rush feels like. It's not until 2 hours later does your actual cortisol rise. So you have a spike, and about 2 hours later, cortisol will go up. And cortisol, although very important, because it's an anti-inflammatory and it helps you essentially survive a stressful situation, it isn't healthy to have this going up every single day, which does happen for a lot of us, right? We were sort of built to be able to run away from a bear or a tiger, right? And maybe be exposed to that occasionally. But our body doesn't know the difference between that type of stressor and, say, a traffic jam, right? When you're in traffic, if that gets you going, or you stress at work, your body, your physiology is doing the exact same thing that it would do if you were being chased by something and in a life-threatening situation. So of course, that cortisol will go up. Now, you aren't dying. A deadline or an exam is not a death sentence, but we get ramped up. And that cortisol, if it does rise on a regular basis, is when it causes some fairly serious effects in our body. So as you can see, this person maybe had a few adrenaline rushes throughout the day. That cortisol doesn't actually have a chance to fall back to normal. It'll actually compound and continue to rise over the course of that day. And then if you do that over the course of weeks or months or sometimes years, we're looking at something called adrenal fatigue. So the adrenal glands are producing your cortisol. That's fine, that's great. But eventually, after perhaps years or even months of very, very severe stress, your adrenal glands are going to have a very difficult time outputting any more cortisol. And that's when your cortisol levels will actually start to drop, and you'll have some of the symptoms that I'm mentioning here. Now, if you came to my one last time, I think we talked about both excess cortisol and low cortisol, right? Today we're talking more about the low cortisol. But remember, when you are under stress and you're producing a lot of cortisol, that's when you get the belly fat, right? We get the spare tire. The excess cortisol causes you to gain weight around the waist that you might not notice too much because your metabolism is also ramped up, so you're burning that fairly quickly. But as soon as you go from that high cortisol to the adrenal fatigue, that weight that you're able to accumulate actually gets stuck. And that's where we see, again, that spare tire effect. And that is the last place your body is going to want to lose weight, because it believes you are in a starvation mode, you are under a lot of stress, so it needs to hold on to energy. And in what better way? Fat tissue has the most energy out of any other tissue, and that's where that's why we store it. I also do a few tests in the office. So fatigue in the morning, I always ask everyone, do you feel refreshed when you wake up? If you say no, and even if after, an 8-hour sleep you still are not refreshed, then you probably have adrenal fatigue, right? Another one I ask or I test for is, I don't know if I wrote it down there, is blood pressure, right? Blood pressure is very important. It keeps us alive. We want it to be low most of the time or normal. But when we go from lying down to standing up quickly, right, we change postures, we actually need our blood pressure to go up just about 10 points temporarily to get the blood to our brain. If it doesn't go up, you will feel lightheaded or dizzy when you stand up. So if you're, again, the type, you've been sitting on the couch, you're watching your favorite show, and then you decide to get up for bedtime or something, and you get the head rush. Or you lean down, you pick something up, and you stand up quickly, and you get that head rush. That's a sign that your blood pressure is not kicking in, it's not going up to get into the brain, and that's a sign, again, of adrenal fatigue, because it is your adrenal glands that stimulate blood pressure changes in your body. So again, I always ask that question. So if that's the case for you, we might be looking at adrenal fatigue. Having blood sugar fluctuations, right? Again, our adrenals are involved in managing blood sugar, and sugar, honestly, is the most inflammatory thing we do to our bodies on a daily basis. It's very stressful to our body to continually have ups and downs in sugar. So if you are adrenally fatigued, do remember you want to watch your sugar intake and consume enough fiber, 25 to 35 grams every day. Feeling burnt out or lethargic, mild depression, I will add anxiety to that as well, low libido, difficulty recovering from exercise or illness. This is another one. If you exercise and you feel worse after, chances are your adrenals are taxed. Dark circles under your eyes, that can also be a sign of food sensitivities, but it can be, again, due to that adrenal issue. Increased susceptibility to infection, right? When we're under stress, our immune system is suppressed, and so we have the inability to fight colds and flus as easily. I will say, and I've said this before in other talks, that it is a good idea, it is a good thing for me to hear that you do get sick occasionally, or you may feel a cold coming on and you deal with it and it doesn't last. But if I have a patient that comes in and says, oh, I haven't been sick in 5 years or in 10 years, right, that to me is a red flag, because we're always exposed. Unless we live in a bubble, we're always exposed to colds and other illnesses. And so you should be having an immune response to those viruses that you're being exposed to. For people that have a very low immune system, their immune system can't actually mount a good response against a virus, and so that person will not have any symptoms. Remember, like your congestion, sore throat, fever, all of those symptoms, it's not the virus doing that, it's your body doing that. Your body is producing the mucus to get rid of the virus. Your body is changing your internal temperature to a higher temperature to kill the virus. So if you haven't been sick and you haven't even felt the smallest inkling of being sick in a long time, it could mean that your immune system is actually more taxed because you don't have the strength to create that response, right? Or again, it could be adrenal fatigue on top of it. Craving sweets or salty foods, again, the sugar because that's our quick fix, and then the salt because those minerals are very important for adrenal health and making our hormones. Frequent dizziness upon standing, okay, so that's what I mentioned. Foggy head or unclear thinking, memory lapses, irritability, and in that difficulty losing weight, specifically right around the waistline. So any of those ring true for anyone? Yeah. So again, this is probably the most common one I will see in the office. And in how we deal with it, unfortunately, a lot of us are using stimulants, so that could just be your coffee, or 3 or 4 per day, energy drinks and colas and all that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, once we reach the adrenal fatigue state, what that does is it raises your adrenaline. There's that caffeine kick, but your cortisol becomes even more taxed. So your adrenals try to push out more cortisol to deal with that stimulant, but there's no cortisol to draw upon. So again, it actually creates a worse scenario for you, even though you might feel temporarily better. So how do we support the adrenals? Again, let's talk about the basics first, treating our foundation. So exercise. Exercise is actually better for prevention. I want to make note of that because there are some people out there that exercise too much, and exercise is still a stress on the body, right? So physical exercise, I have women that come in and they're exercising 2 times a day or 3 times a day, doing these boot camps and all this sort of thing. They're trying to lose this last 5-10 pounds around their waist. They're actually creating a bigger hill to climb, right? So that excess of exercise is creating more stress on the body and causing that body to hold on to that weight even further. So again, you want to exercise more in moderation or to what your body is used to, or better yet, preventatively before you get to this stage. So slowing down, actively resting, having pleasure time, again, it's very good for the mind and body. Eating a variety of whole foods and regular meals, and also supporting protein levels. So again, for any of you who are taking notes, a great way to calculate your protein is to, for the average person, as long as you don't have any sort of kidney issues, is to consume 1 gram of protein for every kilogram of your body weight, right? Or that would be about a half a gram for every pound. So if you're 150 pounds, that would be about 75 grams of protein per day that you should be consuming. Now you want to break that up throughout the day. So 75 grams, that could be 25 with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that's pretty easy to do. You can find lots of charts online. Anything that's sort of the size of your palm is going to be about 20 to 25 grams. So chicken breasts, fish, legumes that are about that size are going to be 20 to 25 grams. People will add additional protein, right? So through protein powders, which I am a fan of, as long as you're still getting most of your protein from food. Nutritional supplementation. So again, when we look at the foundation, and again, you can get tested for these things or simply take a multivitamin that does cover all of these. So magnesium is very important. Magnesium is probably the most common mineral deficiency we see out there. I'm 100% magnesium deficient. I've tested myself several times, but basically eye twitches, muscle cramps, heart palpitations, issues with falling or staying asleep, those could all be magnesium issues. It is the most taxed or demanded mineral when you're under stress. Magnesium is required to make all your happy neurotransmitters, so your serotonin as well as your GABA. So when you're under stress, your demand goes much, much higher for that one. Vitamin C, which is also critical and helps with interferon levels, which is ultimately helping with your immune system. And then all of your B vitamins, so an active B formula to make sure you're getting all the active Bs readily, goes right into your system and you can use right away. Specifically B5, so some people will opt just to take vitamin B5. Vitamin B5 and vitamin C are two main vitamins that are specific food for your adrenal glands. And then finally zinc, because zinc is that sort of secondary mineral that you will be deficient in. Zinc is really important for your immune system as well and for healing. If you know you're ever under stress, things don't heal as quickly, or again, you're more susceptible to colds and flus. And then finally, if you're looking for something with a big punch, you're going to look at adrenal support such as Adrenasense. Yeah.
So when it comes to supplements like the magnesium and Bs and everything, is it okay to go with the recommended dosage on the bottle?
That's a good question. So the question was, if anyone didn't hear it, is if you are going to supplement with, say, vitamin B or magnesium, do you just follow the label recommendation? In most cases, Health Canada is what dictates what supplement companies can write on the labels. You'll also see a little bit of a difference if you do see a naturopath versus health food stores, right? Because there are different regulations on what can be printed on these labels. So that's where product advisors are going to help you, which is the beauty of a health food store, because you get that one-on-one support. Generally, you're going to be taking more than what is on the label, but I always start with the basic recommendation. So, for example, vitamin B5, people are taking upwards of 500 milligrams per day. And if you were to buy a complex, like a B complex, you're probably only getting about 50 milligrams. So that would require 10. But if in the case of the adrenals, I would then just purchase a B5. I think you probably can only get it in 100 milligrams. So again, you're going to work up to potentially 5 of those a day. 250. Okay, so then that would be 2 per day. And the same goes with magnesium and every other, unfortunately, every other vitamin, mineral for that matter. There are lots of different forms of all of these, which again is why getting that personalized support for what you should be taking is important. So for magnesium, we have everything from magnesium oxide, which is a laxative and does not get absorbed very well into the bloodstream, and you may not want to take that if you're just under stress, to magnesium citrate, which I like if you take it as a powder form, because when you take it as a powder and you add hot water, the magnesium citrate actually breaks apart and you end up with an electrolyte magnesium, which actually gets absorbed right away, even in the mouth and in your stomach. If you don't want to do a powder, then I generally suggest magnesium glycinate or magnesium bisglycinate in a pill form. So again, there's differences with all of that. Same with vitamin C. I don't love ascorbic acid because it's acidic. I prefer the calcium ascorbate, so it's a buffered vitamin C. It's not going to be, it's going to be pH neutral. But if you want to go further, then I usually prefer vitamin C coming with bioflavonoids or with some sort of food complex to help you with absorption and utilization. Yeah, that's a great question too. So vitamin Bs, can they be taken? What time can they be taken? Vitamin B is always with food. Anytime you're taking a vitamin or a mineral, I suggest with food because that's where that is generally coming from, right? We want to take that. It's usually from food sources, whereas herbal products is more medicinal. That I generally recommend you can take that on an empty stomach. With the B vitamins, because some people are more sensitive and they actually get more energy from B complex, you may not want to do that before bed. Okay, so morning is generally better. I do B12 shots in the office with folic acid, and B12 is very stimulating, but I do have some patients that not as soon as I give it to them, but basically they go home and they go to sleep. It actually helps sedate them. So everyone is different. Majority of people will have more energy from B vitamins though, so perhaps best to do that in the morning. Yes?
Take it and then stop taking it, or is it an ongoing thing like magnesium, your pH?
Great question. So the AdrenaSense, which is what I'll discuss now, is an adrenal formula that can be used in times of high cortisol or low cortisol. I'll get your answer. I'll get to your question in a minute. So when you, if you were to come see me in the office, I would probably test your cortisol levels, and I would get you to spit into a tube 4 times a day, and then you'd send it off, and I would read your results and tell you what's going on, because your cortisol changes throughout the day. It's supposed to be high in the morning to help you get up. That's why you're supposed to feel refreshed when you wake up. But it's supposed to bottom out and be fairly low after about noon and through the rest of the day, so you don't interfere with the rest of your bodily functions. Now, if someone has high cortisol, I do not want to stimulate their cortisol. And if someone has bottomed out really low cortisol, I don't want to suppress it further. So in those cases, I do very particular treatments if I know exactly how high their cortisol is and when. If I don't know, so for most of you coming in today, right, you're not sure if you have high or low or when it might be high or low, you take a balancer, you take an adaptogen blend, which is what the AdrenaSense is, which is nice because then you can take it in either case. If you had, for example, high cortisol, you would want to avoid licorice products, right? And you can get adrenal support with licorice products, but it might not be good if you actually have elevated cortisol. So to get back to your question, do you have to continually take an adrenal supporting product for a long time as you would maybe with magnesium? Well, it sort of depends on how long you've had stress for in your life. The general rule that we learned in school, which is why I'm taking adrenal support, and I have since I learned this rule, is for every year of stress in your life, you should do about a month of adrenal support. So at least it's not 1-to-1. But if you are looking at, 25 years of stress, or, and stress doesn't always mean bad stress, right? It's just stress. If you've had 25 years of stress, then you're looking at about 25 months or 2 years of adrenal support. And again, it doesn't mean you have to be on the same product. And I generally recommend people sort of pulse on and off these things to sort of get their bodies, mixing things up a little bit. But basically, you are safe. It is safe to take AdrenaSense for that type of time period. And it's a good idea to, while you're on this pathway to healing, to either take something like this or to really focus on those lifestyle and nutritional factors to keep your adrenals healthy. So this particular product is going to support your adrenal function. It helps with restful sleep, right? Because it helps to balance your cortisol, especially at nighttime, so that doesn't interfere with melatonin. It'll also help you reduce stress and you will feel more grounded. I generally suggest you should wait at least a month before you gauge that. Okay, this is not something like the tranquil sleep that will work immediately. This is balancing your cortisol, which can take some time. I generally suggest for any kind of hormone supplementation, you do look at 3 to 6 months, but at least give it a good 1 month before you say, okay, this didn't work, or I have to try something different. The ingredients are very important to understand. So rhodiola, ashwagandha are very good adaptogens, and again, they balance your cortisol. So you can take this, any time of day. I do generally recommend taking it more middle of the day, so you're kind of getting your body accustomed to when your cortisol is going from high to low. So you're kind of getting the balance there. Schizandra and Siberian ginseng also provide more vitality, so give you a little bit more energy. And Suma I've seen people really benefit from Suma, especially if they've got the classic dark circles under their eyes. That would be a really good indication to take this product with the Suma in there. Okay. So what about the thyroid? We don't want to forget about this. Thyroid and low thyroid is very, very common now, unfortunately. 1 in 10 Canadians do suffer from a thyroid condition that has been diagnosed, and 50% of those are undiagnosed. So it's important to understand the workings of the thyroid and ask your doctor more questions if you suspect that you have a low thyroid. So the thyroid hormone is responsible for your metabolism, It's the easiest way to explain it. So it does affect weight management. Some of the symptoms, so having low energy, weight gain, cold intolerance, so cold hands or feet, or say you're in a room like here and you're the first person to bundle up, you kind of more cold than everyone else. That could be because your thyroid is low. You can also do a temperature test, basal body temperature, so upon waking, as soon as you wake up, take your temperature. Your temperature should be, around 37, so if it's going 36.4, 36.6, your thyroid is probably on the sluggish side. Hair loss, so hair loss on the head, and also the latter third of your eyebrows. So if you've noticed that the latter third has become thinner, that's a very strong sign of low thyroid. Dry skin, now I know it's like drier here than the coast. I notice it every time I come out here, but drier skin than usual that you're used to. Constipation, depression, infertility. So just imagine your whole body kind of becoming really sluggish, right? That is low thyroid. Now, if you go, and I'm not doing any GP bashing at all, but with the system, especially in BC, there are limitations to what your general practitioner, your medical doctor can actually test for. So it's important to understand that you need a full picture whenever you're diagnosing thyroid health. We have two main thyroid hormones. We have T3, which is the active hormone, and T4, which is the inactive hormone. Our body will convert T4 into T3 at the level of your body. So your thyroid majority makes T4. The T4 comes out into your bloodstream, and then at the level of like heart, your skin, your reproductive organs, it will convert to T3, and then T3 will do all the magic that it needs to do. Most people are medicated with Synthroid. You may have heard of Synthroid, and Synthroid, unfortunately, is only one hormone, and that is T4, and that's again why we see a lot of people medicated but not having that improvement in symptoms, because although they're getting more T4, their body isn't converting it to T3. And what suppresses that conversion is stress and inflammation. So cortisol and general inflammation, which can be caused by lots of different things, not just injuries, but toxin exposure, food sensitivities, et cetera, et cetera. 80% of women with adrenal exhaustion also suffer from low thyroid. So this is what you want to remember when you go to your GP and you want to get your levels tested. You want to be able to get, I'll go here first, your TSH looked at, but you also want your T4, your T3, and your reverse T3, because then you will see exactly what is going on. And you'll also know how to treat it, because depending on what is high and what is low, you can actually encourage different productions there. Unfortunately, again, I know the BC situation, medical doctors are literally prohibited to testing for all of these things because it costs the system money. You can go to an ND for this full panel to test everything. I think it's about $75, $80. So it's not excessively high. But of course, if everyone was doing this through their GP, it would be costing the system a lot of money. But it's good to understand, if your GP cannot test for everything else because of that situation and only can test for your TSH, then I want you to remember this number, which is your optimal level. So this is literally, the optimal level is between, I'd say, 1.0 and 1.8, whereas, and again, this is BC levels, the optimal or the normal range is between 0.45 and 4.5. So the optimal level is much narrower than what a normal level is, right? So just remember that 1.0 to 1.8. Also remember that TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. So the higher the number actually indicates the lower functioning thyroid. It's the opposite. So if you are over 1.8, okay, so yeah, the higher your thyroid, the higher the TSH, the lower functioning it's the opposite that you might think, right? And that's because TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. So if the number is high, it means your body is trying to stimulate your thyroid more. So if it's needing to stimulate your thyroid more, it's because it's non-reacting, right? Or it's sluggish. A really low number, so under 1, would be considered more hyperthyroid, which is going to be the opposite. So it's going to be stress, anxiety, losing weight, sweating, palpitations, right? Just imagine like high stress. Hyperthyroid is also not a great place to be, but it's much less common than hypo. So if you're over 1.8, if you're over 2, for sure, you're looking at hypothyroidism. And what we diagnose it as is subclinical hypothyroidism, because by the standards currently, you can't truly be diagnosed until your TSH goes over 4.5. But before you get to that 4.5, that's the best part. That's the best time to do more supplementation, preventative measures, because it's much easier to get you back into a normal range than if your TSH is much, much higher. Does that make sense? Okay. So in addition to supporting your thyroid, you want to support your adrenals, because cortisol will interfere with your conversion of T4 to T3. So stress hormones will counter this and encourage this, which is when your T4 converts into reverse T3, which is also an inactive hormone. So getting that whole picture is going to be critical. So that's why when you are supplementing with something for the thyroid, you can either combine it with adrenal support, or you can take something that's going to look at both. So ThyroSense, very important for low thyroid, because it includes all the building blocks for your thyroid hormones. It encourages the proper conversion, but it also supports your adrenals, so it helps prevent that cortisol from interacting with the proper conversion rates. So L-tyrosine is basically the backbone of your thyroid hormone, and iodine is what attaches to make thyroid hormone. So you have those two major ingredients, L-tyrosine and iodine. Then you have ashwagandha and guggul, which are both important for your adrenal support and blood sugar support. And in manganese, copper, and B5 for the adrenals, but also to encourage proper conversion of your T4 to your T3. The dosing for this, and again, I usually, depending on what your TSH score is or your full thyroid panel is, you can do it once or twice a day. So 2 to 4 capsules a day, 2 with breakfast and 2 with lunch. Or if your thyroid is pretty good, but you're feeling a little off, right? Your weight is coming on, you're feeling low energy, and you want to try some adrenal and thyroid support together, then I would just do the 2 in the morning. Again, if you leave it to too late at night, we worry that it's a little bit too stimulating and may interfere with your sleep. For healthy diet and lifestyle factors for your thyroid, you want to include foods that are rich in iodine, because again, that's what you make your thyroid hormone out of. So this would be, sea vegetables, kelp, nori, seaweed, things like that. Managing stress, again, anything to help with your adrenals is going to help with your thyroid. Avoiding GMO soy. So GMOs, as well as soy products, will interfere and actually can create more of an autoimmune response in your thyroid, as well as the gluten. So gluten is fairly well known to create more of an inflammatory response at the level of the thyroid. So again, that's the first thing I'm taking people off just to test, getting them off gluten, just doing a trial of a week or 2 just to see if that starts to improve their hormone levels. Raw goitrogen, so again, I mentioned this at the very beginning, right? So those brassica family foods, broccoli, kale, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, those things, turnips, they are high, they can be high in goitrogen, so cooking those more so than having them raw will help prevent further hypothyroid symptoms. Now, it won't, if you are normal thyroid, it won't affect your thyroid. It's only once that process has started will the goitrogens affect your thyroid. And then fluorine and bromine, those things, those 2 chemicals are in the same family as iodine. And so what can actually happen is bromine or fluoride will actually take the place of iodine in the thyroid hormone and then make that thyroid hormone inactive. So fluoride is in, our water in some cases and certain dental products. Bromine, high in hot tubs. If you're not using chlorine, people are using bromine. So any hot tub user, definitely having their thyroid levels checked on a regular basis because I'm worried that their iodine will be displaced. And lastly, on that subject, we also want to be aware of if we do supplement with things that are coming from the ocean, whether that's fish oil or minerals, then we want to make sure that the companies are testing for radiation, right? Because, well, on my side of things, right, the Pacific Ocean, when Fukushima happened in 2011, all of that radioactive nuclear disaster, it has been shown now, proven that it has reached the shores of BC. So we want to make sure that anything we're getting from that area, again, whether it's fish or minerals, such as iodine or kelp, that it's being tested to make sure there's no radiation in there. Radioactive iodine, again, will go into the thyroid, displace regular iodine, and make that thyroid hormone inactive. Is there a question?
So what do you consider moderation for broccoli, kale, and cabbage?
So raw, if you were going to do it raw, I would do it less than, so once every other day, and or more if you're cooking it. Yeah, I've seen it with people that do smoothies every morning with kale. So switch to, or just alternate spinach, chard, kale, yeah. You had a question?
Does that apply to juicing as well?
Yes.
Not just like blending something?
Yes, juicing as well. Yes. Yeah.
And have you heard of that thyroid test with gentle violet or iodine on your skin to see what the absorption is?
Right, so you can also do that. It's not as accurate as doing a blood test, so getting the iodine and seeing how quickly it absorbs shows how much need for iodine you have, and that can indicate a low thyroid. Okay, so we're almost finished here. I've gone over my 1 hour. I'm not sure how long I was given. But I do want to mention mood and memory because that's our last point for this talk. And again, what is always on our minds, yes, mood and memory are affected by hormones. It can be affected by thyroid, adrenal hormones, and sex hormones, but also the actual neurotransmitters, brain chemicals, and the structure of our brains. So if mood or memory is an issue for any of you, I do recommend, there's probably 3 main products that I recommend. One is a good fish oil because 60% of our brain is fat and 40% of our brain is actually in the form of DHA, which you can get out of fish oil or even out of algae oil. So if you're vegan, you're fine. You can get that support too. The other thing I generally recommend is an anti-inflammatory diet or some anti-inflammatory herbs, whether that's turmeric or more specifically curcumin, that can cross the blood-brain barrier and reduce inflammation because we've noticed that actually treating inflammation in the brain, and there's so many papers coming out now, which is super cool, proving that reducing inflammation in the brain can actually help with pretty well everything from Alzheimer's to PMS to anxiety and depression. You know, our brain pretty much controls everything. There was a study recently taking curcumin for women with PMS that after 3 months of supplementation with curcumin, they had a 60% reduction in PMS symptoms compared to only 15 with the placebo. And again, curcumin isn't working at the level of the ovaries. It's not, doing anything there. It does help with liver, so it does help detoxify, but more importantly, it's reducing inflammation in the brain. And the brain secretes hormones which stimulates your estrogen production. So we're starting to look at more, how do we treat things going on up here, which will eventually cascade into the rest of our bodies. And then the third thing I generally recommend is a good probiotic. So again, omega-3s, I do prefer liquid because you can get much more in your body in one go. In a strong fish oil like this one, This is actually the weaker strength that I've shown up here, but in a teaspoon you can get a very, very high dose that you can use to combat inflammation, even in some severe pain issues as well as autoimmune. Oils are also very important for skin health, your immune system, as well as does actually help with weight loss, because good oils will start to displace stored adipose and help you circulate that fat accumulation out. And then, so last but not least, the other supplements that I do like for mood would be a good probiotic, because we can't forget that the gut-brain axis exists. We didn't really get to talk too much about digestion, but it is something I deal with for every single patient. I make sure that's 100% working, because if your digestive tract is not functioning well, or you have some dysbiosis, or you have leaky gut, you're going to continue to perpetuate inflammation in your body, which again will affect every organ. So I included this one, the Combiotic, I like because this is actually being proven in human clinical trials that if you take this probiotic, it will reduce anxiety and improve symptoms of stress. So yes, it's working on your digestive tract. It helps with diarrhea, constipation, food sensitivities, lactose intolerance, all that sort of stuff. But specifically this combination, there's only 2 bacteria in there. They actually have proven that it will improve mood. This one, honestly, take it for about a week or 2, you should feel a difference. It doesn't take long to start to work. And then finally, the mental calmness, which we are sampling tonight. I throw this one in because it works right away as well. It's extremely safe. Don't worry, it's not going to put you to sleep before you get into your cars. Mental calmness is L-theanine, which I mentioned is one of those ingredients for sleep. But L-theanine is not sedating. Taking L-theanine is sort of like doing meditation for that 20 minutes, right? So it helps ground you. You feel more clear, you're just more conscious, and essentially you become that alpha state brainwave that is so healthy for your body. How much should you have? Honestly, you cannot really overdose on it. So this one is, I think it's 200 milligrams in 2. It's 100 milligrams per. Kids take this product. It's not stated on the label, but I have recommended it to pregnant women, and I know friends that are pregnant that have chosen to try it because it's extremely safe and does not cause any kind of side effects in the system. And last but not least, because everyone always asks me, but I mean, it's very specific to the individual, but what would my top 6 supplements be? And we talked about most of these, but for the general population, including the men in the audience, even EstroSense is important, because some men, like we saw with those alligators and panthers, will have high estrogen, and EstroSense is completely safe and recommended also for men who have higher estrogen levels. I'm starting to test my patients more and more, men as well, for their hormones, and I am also seeing an increase in estrogen overall. Estrogen and testosterone convert into each other, so generally when we see a higher estrogen, we see that drop in testosterone. So again, there's sort of my top 6 supplements. A really good multivitamin, unless you're eating really well. Adrenasense, because we're pretty much all exposed to stress. C-Rich, or an omega-3 for our brain health. Vitamin D as well. I didn't touch on this, but vitamin D is, most of us are deficient. I think it's 75% in Canada. 75% of Canadians are deficient in vitamin D. And how much do I recommend? Now that we're going into winter, I honestly recommend 4,000 in the winter and 2,000 in the summer, and that's even fairly, safe. When someone has a low vitamin D level, I am recommending it about 10,000 IUs for about 3 to 6 months. What's low to me? Well, on the blood test, so if they're under 75, for sure. The optimal, though, is more close to 150. Again, it's about a $65 test, I think. It is in BC, not free of charge through the medical system, but you can ask your doctor for it, and pay at the lab for that if you're curious. This is a great time to test, actually, because you're coming out of your summer. You're going to see how much your body has after you've just been exposed, right? So this should be, right now, you should be at your highest. But if you're still low, imagine where you were last spring, right? So it's a really good time to look into doing that. Estrogens I mentioned, and then probiotics. All right, so I'm going to just finish with, did everyone do their questionnaire? So if you did do the questionnaire, there's sort of 4 different scores. If you're under 50, I just did this last night and I was under 50. But it's been a few years, right, that I've done adrenal support. So if you're under 50, you may have an indication that your adrenals are starting to weaken. If you scored between 50 and 80, this is where you can start taking adrenal support, but also still working on the foundation, so B vitamins and minerals. If you're between 80 and 100, your adrenals are definitely taxed. This is where you can look into getting an adrenal glandular with the Adrenasense. So if you scored 80 to 100, and you don't have a naturopath or you don't want to do that test, this is where it is safe, most likely, to do some of those more stimulating adrenal supportive products. So you can take your Adrenasense for balancing, and then you can add a glandular or licorice, for example. And then if you're over 100, that's when you want to look at actually doing those sorts of things for a longer term, right? So you're looking at, I would give it at least a year, but definitely a good 6 months if you are scoring over 100. So finish there. There's that one resource that I mentioned for the environmental working group. That's where you find your Dirty Dozen, your Clean 15. You can actually look up every product pretty much, so every cosmetic and house cleaner and everything that you want, and it will actually give it a rating as to how safe it is on their standards, and it will also indicate whether those products do contain phthalates and parabens and all those other things you really do want to stay clear of. So I'll finish there and then take questions, and don't forget to, we've got the books, and enter the draw before you leave.